This slide series is done in memory of Dr. Edward Ross Ritvo, who passed away in June of 2020 at the age of 90 years. A pioneer in autism research, he led the field in establishing that autism was neurobiologically based. A graduate of Harvard and a U.S. Army veteran, he spent his entire academic professional career at UCLA. His work included studies of diagnosis and classification, genetics and epidemiology, as well as neurobiology and psychopharmacology. He trained generations of leaders in the field and is survived by family members and many, many students. It's an honor to dedicate this series of talks to his memory with the support of Dr. Ariella Riva Ritvo Slifka and the Alan B. Slifka Foundation.
Hello, and welcome to the Center of Excellence on Autism Spectrum Disorder at Southern Connecticut State University's Professional Video Series. I'm Dr. Kimberly Bean, and I'm a member of the center here at Southern Connecticut State University, and I'm also a professor in the Department of Special Education, the College of Education at the university. And I'm here today to talk to you about implementing IEPs. My objectives in this video presentation are to first identify common best practices in writing measurable IEPs for students with autism spectrum disorders, and then to identify how teachers and service providers can work collaboratively when implementing these IEPs. I will first define some terminology that I will reference throughout this presentation. Throughout the entire presentation, I will be talking about IEPs. IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. It's important to note that an IEP is a legal document, and what is written in it must be followed by all team members. An IEP is written for every student with a disability who is eligible for special education services. It is written by the entire educational team with inputs from the parents in order to design an effective program for a student with a disability. This lengthy document includes numerous factors of the student's program, including reasons for meeting, present levels of performance, goals and objectives, modifications and accommodations, services for transition, service hours and implementation dates, and also the location that those services will be provided. Since an IEP is a legal document, I will be referring to our federal law of IDEA. IDEA is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's the federal law that protects students with disabilities and their families. All students with disabilities in need of special education services will have an individual education plan, IEP, and this IEP will be implemented. This presentation is going to cover how we go from a paper document to full implementation of services. This topic is really important because the prevalence of students with autism is growing internationally, nationally, and locally. A recent study from the United States Center of Disease Control found that based on a sample of 8-year-old children, 1 in 54 students are diagnosed with ASD. The number of students being identified with ASD in schools are also increasing. Specifically in Connecticut, students with ASD receiving special education services has risen from over 1,000 to over 7,000 students in the last decade. These thousands of students in our Connecticut schools all have a variable range of severity of autism spectrum disorder, meaning that not one student is alike, meaning that not all programs are going to be the same. There may be a variability of services and placement options. However, all programming must include the implementation of evidence-based practices. Evidence-based practices are strategies that have been proven through research to be effective. So how do we move from paper to implementation? In order to create an effective program for any student, and particularly a student with autism, we must begin with assessment. When creating an educational plan for a student with a disability, you really need to first focus on the student, and we do that through assessment. We need the data. We use a variety of data across disciplines, We don't just look at academics and behavior. If you've seen the other video in the series, or if you've ever worked with a student with autism, you know that these students have various areas of concerns: social, behavior, communication, academics, motor, sensory, emotional regulation, and transition. We need to look at all these areas through different assessments. We need to dissect these different domains to really understand the student. And we can use a variety of formal and informal assessments across disciplines to collect the data on our students to then be able to identify strengths, interests, and areas of weakness or concern. You must also collect baseline data. You'll have some data through the comprehensive assessments that you've completed, but you may need to create some teacher-made assessments as well, or other curriculum-based measures. You may also need to do some informal observations to collect data on frequency of behaviors. For example, how often a student requests an item throughout an activity. By doing these baseline assessments, you are then able to plan out what your goals and interventions will include. Because next, you will use the data to write goals and objectives. You'll use the data from those formal assessments and baseline assessments to create the most appropriate goals for your students. Here are two examples: one academic goal and one social communication goal, to show how assessment is used to generate appropriate goals. In this example, the assessment of a student showed that his math skills were below average. But with further baseline data collected, the teacher determined that the student's not able to complete two-digit subtraction that requires regrouping. Therefore, a goal is written as follows. Given 10 two-digit subtraction problems with regrouping, student will use a number line to subtract with 90% accuracy. In this next example, social communication assessments showed that the student does not often request items. And in a follow-up observation, the school psychologist noted that in a 30-minute observation, the student did not request any materials for the activity. Therefore, his social communication goal is written as follows. Student will request an item from a peer 3 times in a 30-minute structured activity. By using both formal data and collecting baseline data through teacher-created assessments and observations, clear measurable goals can be written. The next step involves team members to think outside the box. Think about how these domains can overlap. Communication doesn't just happen in a speech room. And in this case, the student is going to have the opportunity to request items in all settings, not just in the speech room. So think about during a math task. While a student is working on math facts with manipulatives, can the student also work on requesting items? Yes. How can the student request items? Will the student be requesting manipulatives? Will the student be requesting a pencil or a piece of paper? There's so many opportunities for the student to be able to request items during everyday tasks in the classroom, just like in this example. The next thing you need to do is identify which evidence-based practice you're going to be using in your instruction. In this case that I was just talking about, how am I going to teach the student to regroup? Maybe I use some visual supports with a number line, or use a task analysis to break down the steps of a subtraction process. There are over 25 identified evidence-based practices that have been proven to be effective for students with autism, some of which are listed here, and other practices are referenced in our guidebook that goes along with this series. When you have a goal and you understand what strategies you're going to use to teach that specific skill, you need to make sure that you are collecting ongoing data to determine if this is working. These progress monitoring dates should be identified through the IEP process. As a team, you should be thinking about how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to visually represent or chart the data in team meetings, and when you will be reviewing the data with the entire team, including the parents. Here's just an example of a visually charted student progress on a regrouping goal from pre-test, 5 work sample data points, and post-test on the same skill. Notice how easy this goal was to measure and how clear the chart is. This chart would be presented at any formal or informal team meeting to determine if the intervention and services are working. If they are working, continue with what you're doing. If they aren't working, talk with the team to troubleshoot. Maybe you go back to the previous step and see if there's another evidence-based practice that could be implemented, and try again. This implementation is a process, and it's not always moving in one direction. The importance of collecting data and analyzing the data determines the progress of the student. The last step is to summarize the components of the IEP for all team members, including families. Remember, I said the IEP is a legal document, and some parts of the IEP may be confusing for parents or other team members who don't have a background in special education. Using something like a comprehensive autism planning system developed by Henry and Miles can help translate a legal document of the IEP into what these services, goals, and strategies look like in the day of a student with autism. It outlines how will each objective be met in various settings across the school day, what supports are necessary throughout the school day, and who is responsible. This is the Comprehensive Autism Planning System, or CAPS. It's referenced here and in our guidebook. Again, this is a really useful tool for teams to use to summarize the key components of an IEP into a readable document for all. You can see that it takes the student's schedule as it pertains to time and activity and breaks down what will be targeted during those times, what strategies will be put in place, and what data will be collected. This type of matrix really highlights the important parts of the IEP document and brings to light how this will be implemented throughout a student's day. Here's an example of a modified planning system that outlines which objective will be worked on and what strategies will be put in place for the student. This student has an objective related to organizing personal belongings. So at the entry of school, coming into the school building at the start of the day, the student will put belongings in their cubby independently. The teacher will verbally remind the student as he walks into classroom to put his belongings away. The teacher will also use a visual task analysis for unpacking belongings for the student to reference while he or she is unpacking. The teacher will also visually praise the student for putting the belongings away. A data sheet will be created using a task analysis for taking care of belongings, and the staff will note the number of prompts or corrections needed for each step. And to help with generalization, a task analysis is also created for home, for unpacking belongings in the home environment as well. Now I will show a few more specific cases to work through and identify key strategies to use to implement effective IEPs. In this first case study, Adriana is a 17-year-old student with autism. She is in a transition program at her local high school, and the focus of this program is on life skills and vocational skills. Adriana's parents are confused with the IEP goals and objectives and question how these objectives are implemented throughout the school day. The team can then come together to focus on some clear strategies to consider. The first thing that they can do is focus on interests of Adriana. Talk to the parents, talk to Adriana. What does she want to do for employment? And also go back to the assessments. Which transition assessments were completed and what were the outcomes? What were Adriana's interests for jobs? Once that's identified, the team can work together to put that into the daily schedule and focus on those goals and objectives throughout the day. And they can use the matrix to outline those activities and objectives to show what would be applicable to the workplace and how these are targeted throughout the day. Here's another case. In this case, George is an 8-year-old student with autism. Parents are advocating for additional goals and objectives to address all the challenges he is exhibiting. And George's special education teacher is worried that there are too many objectives already in George's IEP and worries that he may not meet all of the objectives by the end of the school year. In this situation, it's really important for the team to go back and review all concerns noted from the assessment, and then to prioritize those concerns with input from the entire team, including parents. Once prioritized, the team can write measurable objectives together that everyone agrees on. Then they can use the matrix to outline how these objectives are targeted throughout the day and the role of each team member. All of these strategies that I've covered here in this video can be used to create effective programs for your students. Thanks for listening to this video from our professional series. For more information, you can visit our center website for information about our other projects and how to support us.